All right, so tonight's topic is beware of the hypocrite. As you know, in society, these individuals have always existed. Individuals who are not real. They pretend to be, but they're not. They are disguising themselves. And it's important for us to identify them. Otherwise, we are risking trusting the wrong people. This topic is somewhat related to another topic we spoke about recently called Masters of Deception. Because that's what it has to do with. It has to do with deception, with lying, with falsehood. But here, it involves an individual who is deceiving us, perhaps in a verbal way, perhaps in the way he acts. And it's a lot worse. Because this is not just about someone who misled us, somebody who lied to us. This is actually an individual who's maybe dangerous to society and for sure dangerous to himself. And the reason I say dangerous to himself is because somebody who has this problem, who has this weakness, will perhaps never seek help. He's going to be overconfident. He's actually putting up a big show. And he believes in this show. And that's where the word hypocrisy comes from. Hypocrisy, the Greek word to act out. It's all about a show. And he is different than the other individual that we spoke about, who is corrupt. A lot of people may be corrupt to a certain extent because they're not 100% righteous in what they do. Righteousness is an incredible, beautiful virtue, but not everybody is 100% righteous. We sometimes do things that are not 100% right, even though they may not be terrible, but to be 100% righteous and to be so all the time is a great challenge. So there is different levels of corruption that we spoke about, where people are not 100% pure, and it all will depend on the price. It depends if it's worth it for them to, to give up their principles for something that is not genuine, for something that is not real. But that's corruption. In dealing with a hypocrite, we're talking about someone who has two faces. On the one hand, he appears to be nice, he appears to be a gentleman, he appears to be righteous, he appears to be devout, pious, charitable, humble, all the beautiful characteristics, but in reality, inside, he's rotten, completely rotten, the exact opposite. And we don't usually see that other face. We usually see the nice face that he puts up as a show. It's important at the very start that I point out what hypocrisy is not about. A lot of people make this mistake and they confuse it with somebody who does not practice what he preaches. And there's a lot of people like that too. But it's very, very different, because an individual who preaches, talks about, or even advises others to do something, even though he doesn't practice it, it doesn't mean that he's an hypocrite. It could very possibly be that he believes sincerely in a certain virtue and simply has not had the courage yet to undertake it, to be like that. He has no permission to talk about it. He has no permission to advise others to follow this. It reminds me of the story of how once there was a rabbi who gave a very important speech about modesty amongst women and how they should dress, how they should behave in public. And after the speech, somebody comes over to him and says, "Rabbi, how could you speak about something like this? How could you speak about this topic if your own daughter is not modest?" And the rabbi turns to him, "Just because my daughter is not as modest as she should be, I shouldn't speak about it? On the contrary, I'm letting you know why I'm upset and why it is important to be modest, and so that everybody should follow suit. Someone has to speak about it. Just because he has someone in the family, a member of his family, who's not following suit, he has no permission to talk about this topic. Obviously, it doesn't look right when one preaches what he doesn't practice. Obviously, it doesn't look right. But at the very least, he could explain why this is nonetheless important to talk about. And God willing, one of these days, he will also be like that. In this way, he would take away some of the misunderstandings that people may have, so why don't you do so? And that's important. You don't want to give people the wrong idea. You don't want to mislead them into thinking, well, this is all nonsense. This is all gibberish, just talk, cheap talk. No, he really means it. He just has not mustered the courage yet to undertake this. So hypocrisy has nothing to do with that. Hypocrisy has to do with what the rabbis called en tocho kevaro. His tocho, his inside, is not like his outside. In the inside, he has a certain characteristic flaw. And on the outside, he displays something completely opposite. In other words, as we call it in English, no integrity whatsoever. Integrity is not complete. One way on the outside, but a totally different way on the inside. This is what hypocrisy is about. It's almost like he has a split personality. One side of him we see, and the other side we don't see. Unless one of these days that other side will be revealed, which we'll talk about a little bit later. This topic of hypocrisy is also extensively discussed in Islam. In Islam, someone who's an hypocrite is called munafiq. And hypocrisy is nifaq. I think in Persian too. Yeah. I think the Persians are very familiar with it too, right? Yeah. It is extensively discussed because it's a problem that was recognized all along. People who attempt to get away by putting up a show, putting up a face that they are so saintly and so good. And a lot of people have fallen into the trap. It's one thing if they put up a show and nobody gets hurt, but a lot of people have gotten hurt as a result of these people putting up a show. Now, because they are a danger to society, the rabbis remind us, be careful. Al tistakel bakankan, ela b'ma sheyesh betocho. Never look at outside appearances. Never look at the jug of the jar. Oh, it's so beautiful. Look, it's made out of gold. Don't look at outside appearances because appearances are deceiving. Look at the inside. Investigate. You're going out with someone, girl, boy. Don't be misled by appearances. Check him or check her out well, as best as possible. What is he like? What are his values? His character? Obviously, you want to go and see if there's some chemistry. But the dating game is not a true judge of how things will turn out later to be. It can give you some indicators. Yes, you want to see what it feels like. Is the communication smooth? Does he behave himself? Does he share similar values? So obviously, you need the dating experience to figure out the basics. But it's not a guarantee. You don't know how she or he will be under pressure. Will they make a good father or mother? Only time will tell. That depends on one's destiny, on one's luck, on one's mazal. It depends, of course, on our free will too. What people make of themselves, what they choose to be. And this is another topic that we'll talk about another time, is how could it be that a person begins to be a good person? He begins as a good individual, as a righteous individual, a devoted husband and wife, but later on in life, at some point, they change. They become angry, they become nervous, or they're no longer as dedicated, or worse, they betray the trust of the partner. How could it happen that they started out okay, and later on in life, the relationship soured? So that's a different topic. Here we're dealing with someone who pretty much is a hypocrite from the very beginning, just that we don't know about it. Not that he's good and later turns bad. From the very start, early on in life, he's like that. So the rabbis remind us, be careful, be suspicious, be doubtful, be respectful of every human being, but it's okay for you to keep a distance, not to be immediately trusting. Don't be naive. There's a lot of people out there who are not real, unfortunately. What's the symbol of hypocrisy, the rabbis tell us? The pig. The pig. Now, someone who does not eat kosher food would not know why the pig is a symbol of hypocrisy. But for those who eat kosher, what does it remind you, the pig? Well, you're right, exactly. The Torah, in describing to us what makes an animal a clean animal, is that it has to have two signs, split hoofs, and it chews its cud. Well, there are some animals that chew their cud that don't have split hoofs. One of them is a camel. There is one animal out there that actually has split hoofs but doesn't chew its cud, and that's the pig. And when we say pig, we mean anything related to the pig. When the Torah is talking about an animal, it's pretty much talking about a species, not just an animal. So if somebody finds another animal that is like the pig, but it's not exactly a pig, it says, oh, I found another one. Why didn't the Torah mention this? Well, the Torah meant all that species that pretty much resembles a pig. There's one type that will have split hoofs but not chew its cud. And guess what? This pig shows off its hoofs. You can see it. The other sign is internal. You don't see it. So pig is a symbol of hypocrisy. Again, the rabbis are telling us, just be careful. What you see is not always what you get. One of the famous kings in the Second Temple era was Yanai. That was his Greek name, Yanai HaMelech. Before he passed away, he gave some last instructions to his wife. And he said something very interesting. Apparently he had a lot of experience. You know, being a king, being in power, there's a lot of politics, infighting, intrigue, issues, friends and enemies. Probably he made many enemies. You know, as they say in various languages, friends you have to buy, because enemies you'll get for free. And apparently he made many enemies, but he did not always know who were his enemies. They smiled to him, I'm sure. Yes, Your Honor. Right? So he tells his wife, right before he passed away, on his deathbed, he says, my dear wife, let me give you some important advice in life. You have no reason to be concerned with the Prushim, with the Pharisees, with those religious people. The real religious people, those rabbis, they are what they are, pretty much. You know, you can see it. They practice their religion, they're observant, and you have no reason to fear them. I'm not saying that they're not corrupt, but you know, they are at least what they are, or what they appear to be. No reason to think otherwise. And you have no reason to fear those who are secular, who are not Prushim, because they're secular. You can see that they don't care about religion, they don't care about their faith. For them, perhaps there's no God. You can see it in their way of life, in the way they conduct themselves. But you know who you do have to fear? The tzvoim, the hypocrites. They are the ones that dress up and act like the religious guys, with a long beard. They look very important. But they're rotten through and through inside. Through and through. And you don't know this, because they dress and act like the religious ones, but they're totally rotten. It's not that just they're not religious, but they're rotten. Those are the only ones you have to fear. Apparently, there are some of them. They do exist. Now, it is not recorded anywhere. It's not documented. if he advised her how to know this. How do you investigate who is a hypocrite and who's not? But we're going to be talking about it. A little bit of some of the signs of how one can recognize a hypocrite. I mean, some of what I will discuss with you is common sense and it's obvious. There's a lot of good books on psychology which will discuss some of what they say in regards to this particular personality, the symptoms that make up the hypocrite. And once you put it all together, you can get a picture of this individual. But it's not easy because they try to hide it as best as possible. Why is hypocrisy included in this series of business ethics? We started this small series called Business Ethics. Why did I include hypocrisy in this series? What does it have to do with it, with ethics, business ethics? Well, because one of the ways where you can identify Mr. Hypocrite is in business. The rabbis tell us the yetzer of mammon, the evil inclination of money, is the most powerful of all. Very few people come out with flying colors, never cheating, never lying, never swindling, very honest in their business dealings. There's a lot of temptations. We spoke about bribery last week. There's a lot of challenges in life. And some people fall, some people not as much. So in the area of business, anything that has to do with money, you may be able to uncover him. So this could be definitely seen or experienced in business, where you thought someone was so righteous, where you thought somebody was so pious because of the way he prays in the synagogue, because of the way he dresses. He has such a long beard until the knee. I mean, you thought, wow, maybe he's related to Moses. I mean, it's all possible. I mean, the impression. And it could be that he's a total ignoramus, regardless of how he looks and how he dresses. Or worse, that he's a hypocrite in disguise. So, if you're going to do business with him, you don't know what you're getting into. If he borrows your money, you may never see that money back again. So that's why this topic is very, very relevant to business ethics. Now, even though what we've been saying is that a hypocrite will do his best to hide, in the end, at some point, usually, his true colors will come out. Something will uncover him. Something will bring out this fact that has not been known for perhaps many years. In the end, the true colors will come out. But in order for us to recognize him, to be able to identify the hypocrite, we first must begin to dissect this type of personality. It's a very unique kind of personality. Remember what we said last time. Corruption is everywhere, in various degrees. But people could be good people. It's just that they were tempted. It's just that they needed to supplement their income. But on a day-to-day basis, they're fine. They make good husbands, good fathers. They're a little bit corrupt in some way. Even people who go on a diet, they sometimes cheat. They cheat. And they don't want anybody to see when they're cheating, usually. They're having that cake. Yeah, listen, people are tempted by all kinds of things, and in some ways, it's a little bit excusable. But here we're talking about an interesting, unique personality that in order for us to identify him, we need to dissect it. And when I say dissection, we need to borrow a little bit from psychology. I can tell you that psychologists have done a pretty good job in describing the hypocrite. I've read a lot of material about it from a psychologist's perspective, and I think they pretty much nailed it, pretty much have it. Even though we're going to bring in the Jewish perspective here a little bit, nonetheless, there's a lot of psychology dedicated to this topic. But before we get into the psychology, it's interesting what those who believe in survival of the fittest would say. That evolutionary theory, that there's something called survival of the fittest. Those who are stronger, they will survive. how would they explain hypocrisy? So I saw a very interesting comment about this, that those who believe in survival of the fittest will claim, you know how a hypocrite becomes a hypocrite, or why you have hypocrites? Because they say it is easier to appear to be fair and harder to be fair. To be a fair person is hard. It's just easier to appear to be fair. And since human nature has it, embedded in it, a certain amount of laziness by nature, so it will more often choose appearance over reality. So in trying to explain survival of the fittest and how this would apply to hypocrite, to hypocrisy, this is how they would handle it, perhaps. Listen, it's just easier for someone to give the appearance of something, because to be fair is hard, and it is a little hard. So it's going to choose whatever is easier, less of a battle and less of a struggle, and it will most often choose to appear to be fair, but not necessarily to be fair. But I don't think that, of course, that has any validity whatsoever, where psychology does dissect this type of personality and says as follows. An individual who's a hypocrite really is indicative of various character flaws. They don't know exactly how much of each of the character flaws, but they can identify those flaws in this individual. And these flaws are actually important for us to recognize, because if an individual does have any of them, he needs help. Regardless of whether he's a hypocrite or not, any one of the flaws that I'm going to talk about here is serious. But psychologists say that a real hypocrite does contain various degrees of these flaws. Let's begin with narcissism. Many perhaps have not heard of this term. But narcissism is an individual who actually feels a sense of gratification in admiring his own attributes. He thinks highly of himself. This is not exactly a superiority complex. That's something a little bit different. He actually is happy with his own attributes. But the problem with that in itself is not so bad. You know what's bad about narcissism? Is that this kind of thinking or behavior leads to an increased amount of pride, egotism, which is selfishness, and what a lot of people don't realize is that it also leads to a lack of empathy for others. Well, it's obvious. If you're going to be focusing more on yourself and emphasizing the self, then that's going to take away from someone else. So what's going to be developing here is more pride, egotism, and a lack of empathy for others. All right, that's one area of flaws. The second area is called self-righteousness. To a certain degree, not necessarily lots of it, but to a certain degree, a hypocrite will think more highly of his qualifications than of others. Okay? So this is not narcissism, this is called self-righteousness. He thinks he's better. And now comes my favorite. And I think that the following character flaw is perhaps one of the more important ones. It's called Machiavellianism. Because this one involves the manipulation or the exploitation of others. cynical regard for morality, and a focus on self-interest and deception. I think that's the best way to define Machiavellianism. Because what you have here is the nucleus, if we can call it that, of hypocrisy, manipulation, deception, exploitation of others, taking advantage of others. People who have this particular character flaw tend to give priority to money and power, and very low priority to community building and family concerns. So we are beginning to see a picture of what this individual values, what are his priorities, and how he behaves, what he stresses, what he talks about. So if we pay close attention, we can figure it out. I also agree with those who say that this particular kind of behavior or this personality correlates highly with the honesty, humility dimension of the 6-factor or hexagon model. In psychology, this is known when they test people for what type of personality they have, what are they like. One of the areas that is tested is honesty, humility, more or less. So this particular individual correlates highly with this particular problem area, or that which is lacking or weak in such an individual. But I would add an additional detail to this honesty, humility area that can be seen to be lacking in this individual, and that is that he does have, however, simulated humility, which the rabbis point out. A real hypocrite will simulate that he's humble. Because after all, that's a tactic to use to conceal his rottenness. He's such a humble person. He doesn't raise his eyes to look at women. You know, he's so righteous. He's so careful. Simulated humility, the rabbis tell us, can be seen in them as well. In order to understand this, I'm going to share with you an incredible story that is brought down in our tradition of a father who gave advice to his son before he passed away, similar to that king that gave advice to his wife. A father wanted to leave behind some important instructions to his son, what he should follow, what he should do, what's important in life, what's not. His last testament, pretty much. And he told him, I want to give you a very important piece of advice in life. And that is to beware of hypocrites. And I'm going to tell you when you can suspect if somebody is possibly a hypocrite. And then you should be cautious. Is if you see an exaggerated humility, much more than the typical, much more than what is acceptable. Humility in an exaggerated form, this is to be suspected. Okay, remember that. All right, he remembered that. He was a very wealthy young man, and he married a poor orphan. He figured, poor orphan, she won't be so demanding, she will be a plain girl, a good child, righteous family, hopefully, simple, and hopefully he will have a good life with her. It appeared to be that everything was going well, but something bothered him. Every time he asked her, let's go on vacation together, let's go somewhere together, let's go on a cruise, let's go on a trip together, she would always say, no, I don't think it's such a good idea, you can go yourself. I'm a woman and men are going to look at me, and it's not good for men to look at women. You know, that could lead to all kinds of trouble and issues, and I'm religious. And you know me, I try to be careful. So to go out in public and be seen is not such a good idea for me. But you go and enjoy yourself. Well, at first, he thought, wow, she's such a righteous woman. He's so lucky. But that's the kind of excuse she would always give him. And it bothered him because all of a sudden it triggered that advice that his father had given him. This is exaggerated. He hasn't heard this from anybody. I mean, everybody behaves normally. You go on a trip and you watch yourself. You're modest. You don't try to draw attention. But what she was saying repeatedly, it was already too much for him. So he decided one day he's going to test her. He tells his wife, I'm going on a big trip. I'll be away for a while. Perhaps you want to come with me this time. She says, no, honey, enjoy yourself. I'll prepare your lunch for you. I'll do everything to prepare your trip for you. I'll pack your bags for you. But you know me, I try to be home and not be seen in public. Okay, he says, fine. So he prepares himself to go on this big trip. He walks out, closes the door, but his real plan was to come back at night to check on his wife. Sure enough, he comes back and checks on his wife, and he sees another man in his bedroom. So I don't have to elaborate, right? As soon as he sees what's going on, he's so shocked that he begins to say something. And she, his wife, and the man there see him. And this woman, his wife, tells the man, go and kill him. This righteous woman, supposedly, saw that she was pretty much caught red-handed, and she tells this other man, go and kill him. And this man takes out a knife to go out and kill him. And this husband runs out quickly and flees the house. He's so heartbroken, so sad. His father was right. Why didn't he realize this before? Now what is he going to do? He can't go back to his home. Where is he going to sleep? He sleeps on a bench. Sleeps that night on the bench. It just happened to be that that night somebody broke into the king's treasury and stole some of the jewels of the throne. So the guards went out looking, and they find this guy sleeping in the bench, and they suspected that it's him. And they dragged him to jail, confess. You know, in those days they used to force a confession. You know, you're the thief, otherwise what are you doing in the bench? You know, he was so much in shock that he couldn't even talk and explain himself well. And he was just led to jail. And they told him, listen, unless you confess and tell us exactly where the jewels are, you're going to be hanged. Tomorrow, the next day, you're going to be hanged in the gallows. He says, I don't have anything, I didn't take it. You know, you want to hang me, go ahead. He's so depressed, he doesn't care anymore. So they take him to the gallows. On the way to the gallows, they had a custom that the bishop goes along with this person who's going to be hanged. The last rites, they call it in English. You know, confess and say what you need to say before you die. And as they're walking, he hears how this bishop tells the guards, oh, be careful, don't take him too close to the curve. There's a whole ant colony there, and we don't want him to step on the poor ants. Because Rahamav al kol ma'asav, the verse says that God has mercy over all his creatures. So we don't want him to accidentally step on those innocent ants. Well, what do you think happened at that moment that he heard that? Something triggered in his mind again. Something went off in his head. Wait a minute. I think that this guy is a hypocrite, this bishop. I just have a feeling that he's one of those that my father meant. Exaggerated saintliness, righteousness, humility. So he tells the guard, I want to confess. Please take me to the king. There's something very important that I want to tell him. He's taken to the king, Your Honor, I'm going to tell you the truth. but it's the bishop who's the thief. The bishop, the thief, says, you have any proof? He says, you can go check his house. Sure enough, they checked the bishop's home, and they found all the jewels that were stolen. They take him back, they take this guy back to the king, and the king says, tell me, what happened here? You were found on a bench. You were sleeping outside in the street. How do you know the bishop stole the jewels? Why didn't you say that in the beginning? Tell me, what's your story? So he told him the whole story of how before his father passed away, he gave him this advice, and he didn't realize it until it was late, that his ex-wife was not so righteous after all. She was a hypocrite. He only realized it later on, and after that it was already too late, and he found another man there, and he ran away, of course, and that's why he was sleeping in the street on the bench. And when I was taken to the gallows, I suspected the same thing with this bishop. The way he reacted, and what he expressed about being careful not to step on the ants, that just triggered something in my head. It just reminded me of what my father said, and sure enough, you see, it's true. So the king, of course, rewarded him for this discovery, and the king also hanged his ex-wife and that man who was found in the house. A very interesting story, but it does tell us a lot about how this problem does exist, that there are individuals out there that we may never suspect, because they give the appearance of being so saintly, so righteous, but they could be completely rotten in the inside. And it would behoove us to try to identify them. You know, obviously we may not ever overhear them acting in an exaggerated way. You know, you have to live with a person for a while to hear something, to see something. So we need other indicators other than he or she's demonstrating a very exaggerated humility. So what are some of the indicators that will give them away? One of the indicators that professionals discuss that can easily be seen amongst these people is that they tend to blame others. They tend to point out the mistakes of others all the time. And when it comes to their mistakes, they excuse themselves. Blaming others and excusing themselves is sometimes seen. They tend to also talk a lot about their actions, putting their actions on display, because they want to be honored. Who, from history that you recall, is the biggest hypocrite of all? Esav. Esav Rasha. Esav, together with Yaakov, were the two children of Yitzchak and Rivka. Esav was very, very different than Yaakov. Yaakov was righteous, honest, truthful, and Esav was not. Esav is in some ways incarnated in Rome. The Roman Empire is from Esav. And as a result of that, those qualities are exemplified or seen in the Roman Empire in various ways. Esav is called a hypocrite because on the one hand he honored his father very, very much, like no one else did. But when it came to his other areas of life, he was a wicked individual. He was corrupt. And his father did not know about this. He misled his father. You know, it's one thing to say, listen, this is the way I am. You know, accept me the way I am. I have this weakness. No, a hypocrite would never do that. Because part of being a hypocrite is to conceal that other side. Esav did his best to conceal it, but Yaakov knew who Esav really was, and so did his mother know who this child was all about. But apparently Rivka did not want to ruin that special relationship that Yitzchak had with his son. Listen, Esav gets credit for that. One mitzvah that he did do right. But still, he was a hypocrite. And I thought a little bit about this, and what's interesting, that what was the punishment or the lesson that Esav had to learn as a result of this kind of behavior during his lifetime? that Yaakov, his brother, came and took the blessings away, bemirma, through a trick. Did it have to be through a trick? It couldn't be in any other way. It couldn't be done in an honest way. God could not have told us, listen, give the blessings to Jacob instead. Why did it have to be done in this way? Perhaps one explanation could be, this is a lesson to Esav. Listen, this is what you do to others. You cheat others, you lie to others, you deceive others. It's going to be done to you as well. We've talked about this measure for measure idea. And this concept perhaps applies here too. This is the way to deal with him. He had to learn on his own body, what he does to others. He had to see what it feels like when you cheat others. He cried. He obviously valued those blessings. But listen, if you do this to others, it will be done to you. The reason why people have a hard time being 100% honest, 100% sincere, is because of the following. It is human nature. It is partially human nature here for an individual to think highly of themselves, to highlight the strengths and achievements, and to overlook the weaknesses and failures. That is partially human nature. Even if somebody's not a real hypocrite, that's quite normal. In psychology, they call this self-serving bias. They like to point out the good and not point out the bad. So that already makes it difficult for people to be 100% straight, 100% honest. Then you have another problem, or another weakness, I should say. It happens quite a bit that people will fabricate evidence or offer an explanation after they've already made a decision. They've made a decision, and after they've made a decision of what they want to do or believe, they fabricate an explanation for it. As long as it makes some sense. Once they've made an explanation, once they've given an explanation, they stop thinking. They don't even try to go back and review what they've said or the decision that they've made. As long as it makes some sense. They stop thinking altogether. And here what you have, psychologists call it post hoc fabrication, because they fabricated the evidence after the fact, and you have what they call a stop thinking altogether rule. Stop thinking altogether. So this is another weakness that you see, especially when we're dealing with all kinds of theories about evolution, the theory of abiogenesis, how everything all of a sudden sprang to life from nothing, is people have made a decision. People have come up with some idea that they very much want to believe in, and afterwards they fabricate or make up the evidence or try to explain it in what they believe makes sense. What will happen, however, is when you press them for more evidence, for real evidence, they will seek evidence that confirms what they already believe in. And this, in psychology, is called confirmation bias. And we've explained a little bit of this kind of rationalization, justification, when we spoke about how the mind works. That there's all kinds of biases that human beings naturally have. This is a weakness, and some have more of this weakness than others. So because of that, it is difficult to begin with for a human being to be 100% honest without trying to move away a little bit from what is real, to give his beliefs or his deeds or actions more credibility. He wants to look good. He wants it to look right in the eyes of people. And therefore, there's certain biases that he may adopt, he may have, to be able to cover up his faults or his way of thinking. All right, this more or less explains the symptom. What psychologists don't really do is talk about how to cure this problem. That's what we're going to try to do. The next few moments is, how do we deal with it? What do you do to help this individual if he wants to be helped? What could you say? Well, remember what Eliyahu Navi, Eliyahu the prophet, said to the group of Jews who were trying to be observant Jews but also worshiping idols? Ad matay atem poschim al shtei seipim? Right? Until when are you going to try hopping between the two camps, between the two sides? If Hashem is the real God, go with him. If this idol is the real God, then go with him. You can't have the cake and eat it too. You can't have both. Choose which one you believe is the real. You can't have both. This is really the question to the hypocrite. In confronting him, this is what you have to tell him. Sir, who is your God? Who do you worship? Who's your employer? Is it God or perhaps the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, the evil inclination? What are you striving for? What are your priorities and your values? What do you want to achieve in life? What's important to you? That will determine which direction he wants to go. Because there's only two, the truth and falsehood, emet and sheker. Doing the will of God, doing what is purposeful, is the path of truth. Doing that which is contrary to the purpose of life, to the purpose of creation, that which is contrary to God's plan, is what the sitra hara, what the impure forces want to accomplish. You want to go with that gang, or you want to go with the truth? There's only two. There's nothing in the middle. The same thing is with the theory of evolution or any similar theory. You either have creation or you have that, nothingness. Just things by itself. There's nothing in between. Either you believe in this or you believe in that. You have to make up your mind. You can't have both. So what happens is that the hypocrite realizes he's pretty much, put on the spot where he has to make a decision that he can no longer have the two faces that he's had. If we want to emphasize it even more, we tell him the following. Listen, if you continue this kind of a behavior, you know what you really are? You're a traitor. A traitor? A lot of people are going to be surprised by this. Why is a hypocrite a traitor? What's a traitor? A traitor is an individual who was on your side for a certain amount of time and then went to the other camp, to the enemy, and now he's against you. That's a traitor, right? Well, where do we see this in the Torah? There's various examples of this, but you actually see a certain level of betrayal in the very first primordial sin, Adam and Chava, when they went against God's clear instructions. And they followed the instructions of the Nahash. They went with the Nahash, with the serpent, instead of with God. Okay. What happened as a result of this betrayal? All of a sudden, they feel embarrassed. All of a sudden, they feel shame. They're naked. There's a lot of explanations of what that nakedness means. But the simple explanation is that all of a sudden, they see their animal part of the human being. They see their nakedness. They see those parts that for some reason human beings most want to cover and conceal. We don't want to show that. I know there's some beaches that people don't care, and they undress completely. I'm not talking about totally lack of shame. Human nature is to have shame and to cover up and to dress. And here all of a sudden after committing this sin, they feel ashamed, they feel embarrassed of their nakedness. That nakedness reminds them that they're a half animal. And that human being doesn't want to be reminded that he's half an animal. He wants to think of himself as someone special and great. Remember, that's human nature. So he wants to cover up that which is an animal. Not only does he want to cover up, God covers them up. God gives them clothes, it says, right after the sin. Very strange. The Torah is telling us something about clothing here. When you learn Hebrew, you will notice that the word for traitor and a garment is the same root. Beged, boged. Beged, garment, boged. Why is a traitor a garment? Why do they share the same root, the same three letters? Because that's what a traitor does, he's covering up. He's concealing his real intentions. So the covering up here of that which is animal in us, in some ways, is because we don't want to be reminded of that, but we need to be reminded of that sin. We need to have that shame constantly. So that shame was left there. So even though that's the fact that we're not as pure as they were before the primordial sin when they felt no shame, when they were so pure, now because we've succumbed to our desires, to the evil inclination, and therefore emphasized the physical a lot more than the spiritual, we're constantly struggling with covering up that shame, which in some ways needs to be covered, but on the other hand, we need to remind ourselves of what we did as well. So the covering up is also a reminder of that particular sin, that particular act of betrayal. Falsehood, sheket, is a tremendous power, tremendous force in the world. And because of that, we need to fight it. Because it is so powerful, we need to fight it in any way we can. It is very much spread out all over the world, the koach, the force of falsehood. It's so spread out that there is a very cute saying in Spanish. Si las personas fueran dinero, habría muchos billetes falsos. If people were money, then there would be a lot of counterfeit money all around, if you understand the expression. If people were money, there would be lots of counterfeits, because there's so much counterfeit, there's so much falsehood, that unfortunately you see it everywhere. The best thing for an individual to do who has any characteristic flaw is to remind himself of this famous verse that says, Ayer pere yulad adam. When a human being is born, comes into this world, he's a wild donkey. He's unrefined. A great deal of what we need to accomplish in our life in this world is to refine our character, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish. Refinement of character is so important. Nobody comes down here like an angel. If you're an angel, you would be with the angels. We have flaws, we have weaknesses, and we need to deal with them, we have to refine them. Constantly, from day one till we leave this world. So we need to be reminded that no human being is perfect, we all have flaws and weaknesses, and we need to do our best to refine them continuously. But especially in the area of humility, of humbleness, because that can help us a great deal to overcome other areas in life that are problematic. For example, admitting a fault, admitting a mistake, that can be so helpful in marriage. It can be so helpful in many areas of life. Admit it. You were wrong, you made a mistake, say I'm sorry. People who don't understand this are going to have a lot of trouble in life. You're not perfect, right? So what's wrong with admitting it? On the contrary, you're going to get credit for admitting it. You're not going to be severing a relationship here with someone who's going to be so upset at you that you always think you're right. No, we're sometimes not right. We sometimes make mistakes. That can only come about if we really develop humbleness. Another example of where humbleness can really help is what the rabbis advise. Lamedet leshoncha lomar eni yodea. Train your tongue to say, I don't know the answer to your question. Sometimes people are so overconfident, or at least give the appearance that they are, that they tell you what they think. Wait a minute, are you sure? You don't know? Say, I don't know. Or I'm going to look into it. It's better to say, I don't know, than to look like a fool by giving some sort of explanation or answer that is totally without any foundation. So the rabbis tell us, get used to saying, I don't know. And last but not least, the advice of Shlomo HaMelech. Pales ma'agal raglecha v'chol derachecha yikonu. Shlomo HaMelech advises us, if you want to do things right in life and not make so many mistakes that you later on have to correct, you want to hopefully avoid making mistakes and doing things right. Pales ma'agal raglecha v'chol derachecha yikonu. The English translation is weigh, or use a level. You know those levels that they use in construction to see if something is straight? Use that level, or weigh the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Always evaluate and check your path. Check to see if it's straight. Seek the advice of others who may know better. Check with them if what you're doing is right or wrong. If you're not sure, if you're in doubt, ask. Don't be overconfident. Try to avoid making mistakes. Don't have this lax attitude, okay, it's not the end of the world, so we all make mistakes. No, of course we're going to make mistakes here and there. And we're going to hopefully correct the mistake. Right? But don't do it intentionally. If you can avoid it, learn. Don't be ignorant. A lot of people are simply ignorant, and they're going to be blamed for not learning. As they tell you in this country, ignorance of the law is no excuse. You have to learn. Life is a responsibility. And even though not everybody, thank God, will end up becoming a hypocrite if they don't learn, there's a lot of good people out there, right? Good-natured people. But there's a lot of bad and there's a lot of evil. That's just a fact. And some people become a victim of the evil. Some people, unfortunately, become enslaved in the grips of evil. And they end up working for the Satan, for the Yetzirah. Devout employees doing what the Satan wants and not doing what Hashem wants. There are others who are righteous who are doing what God wants, and there are others who are not. I don't know how many there are, but there are some. And if, God forbid, we are in any way associated with them or in any way befriend these people, we may be very, very disappointed, hurt. Not just financially, but emotionally by these people who may one day betray us and we would never know of it, God forbid. So obviously we want to pray to Hashem that He should safeguard us from all evil and from all these kinds of situations that come about in life, that we should not be a victim to fraud. And today, as you know, there's all kinds of fraud. There's cyber fraud. There's just so much. And you probably know about that too, right? Fraud in all kinds of ways. And they're using technology to defraud you. And you ask yourself, why? What do these people want? They want to make money illegally? They don't want to make it the hard way? That's the sheker. That's the power of falsehood. It's a real power that we need to contend with. And you can only contend with it by being a better person. In other words, you don't do in Rome as the Romans do. No. You be the good person. You be the righteous individual. You do things right. At the same time, be careful. There's a lot of people who are not like you and don't think everybody's like you. On the contrary, the rabbis tell us, remember, there's a lot who are not like you, who are opposite to you. And there's some who will put an appearance that they're good, but they're not. They're rotten. Be careful with them. But in the meantime, you do what is right, refine your character, and maybe one of these days, there's a chance that they will learn from you, and you will not learn from them. I explained once that was the whole argument between Abraham and Sarah. Sarah tells Abraham, get rid of Ishmael from the house. He's a bad influence over Isaac. Abraham says, but perhaps Isaac will be a good influence over Ishmael. So we need God, the arbitrator. Who do you think he said was right? Listen to your wife. Listen to your wife. She happens to be right. The women have a very, very strong intuition, and she's right this time too. The chances of the bad influencing the good are unfortunately greater than the good influencing the bad. So whenever a husband and wife have the following problem, one of them wants to be more observant and wants to be better and wants to do things right, and the other one doesn't want to change, doesn't want to budge. What should you do? Just get divorced? No. Even though it's very difficult to overcome character flaws and deal with such challenging situations where one of them is not as good as you would like him to be, he's not so honest and so forth, you be the good one, because there is a chance, I say a chance, that the bad will learn from the good. And if more and more people do the right thing, the good thing, maybe we will be a light unto the nations. Maybe we will be able to transform the world. It hasn't happened because this power of falsehood, of sheker, is so powerful. Throughout history, nothing has changed. We still have wars. We still have trouble. We still have human beings beheading other human beings. I mean, the barbarity of Genghis Khan is still around. You think it was just in the history books? Today you see it live in color. It's terrible. And you say to yourself, wait a minute, where has this world gone to? They've reached the moon. They've stepped on the moon. But the human being has not advanced. Character flaws, they've always been around. And some people have more of them than others. Nonetheless, for us, we need to do our best to be righteous, to be good people, to be refined. And hopefully one of these days, if those individuals are really eager to change and to perfect themselves, we will show them the way. And that is to embrace the truth, to work for Hashem and not to work for the other camp. And in order to work for Hashem, you have to be truthful. You have to refine your character. And God willing, if a person really embarks on the path of refining and perfecting himself, he will receive divine assistance from Shamayim.